The courtroom was bored. That was the problem. Judge Morton had seen 100 military misconduct hearings and expected this one to be the same. Another service member, another procedural mess, another long day. So when he asked the woman standing before him, "And what exactly was your call sign, Lieutenant?" he meant it as a joke. A smirk, a chuckle from the gallery, a shuffle of papers from a clerk who was barely awake. But the woman did not laugh. And neither did the room. Once they heard the name Night Fox whispered like a threat. A name half the court recognized. A name the other half pretended not to. Within minutes, boredom turned into stillness. Stillness into tension. Tension into disbelief. And when the truth finally settled, the entire court stood, not because anyone ordered them to, but because legends don't walk into a courtroom every day, especially legends disguised as single mothers. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, stories of dignity, courage, and hidden strength, make sure you follow the heart-listen stories for more real-feeling, emotional, cinematic narratives that stay with you long after they end. The morning began like any other military administrative hearing. Cold fluorescent lights, utilitarian benches, and an air so sterile it felt engineered to remove emotion from the room. Yet, beneath the regulated quiet, something simmered. Lieutenant Lissa Hale, 36 years old, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, posture perfect despite exhaustion, walked into the courtroom with the deliberate, economical steps of someone who had spent years calculating the safest path through hostile terrain. No theatrics, no dramatics, just controlled movement. Her dark blouse and formal uniform jacket were crisp, understated. Nothing that announced who she used to be. Nothing that hinted at what the intelligence community once whispered about her. She moved like someone who preferred shadows. She moved like someone who had survived things the people in the room could not imagine. In her left hand, she held a small folder. In her right hand, the hand of her 8-year-old daughter, Arya, who clutched a fox-shaped keychain. Lissa guided the child to a seat with a soft squeeze to her shoulder. "Remember what we talked about?" she whispered. Arya nodded. "Stay quiet. Stay calm. Read my book." "Exactly." The girl opened a battered copy of Wings of Silver, oblivious to the dozens of eyes studying her mother. Some pairs evaluated, some judged, some underestimated, especially Judge Morton. He leaned back in his chair, adjusting his glasses. Late 50s, impressive resume, a reputation for sarcasm disguised as judicial humor. He tapped his pen as though this hearing was already a waste of his time. "Lieutenant Hale," he began, "you're here regarding allegations of—" He skimmed the sheet in front of him. "Failure to comply with orders during a joint training simulation and inappropriate conduct toward superior officers." His tone carried boredom, not severity, as if none of it mattered. Lissa waited for the judge to finish reading her supposed failures. Her expression neutral, eyes soft but unblinking. Across the room, Commander Reyes, the prosecutor, clicked through slides with mechanical efficiency, photos, timestamps, redacted reports. He didn't look at Lissa once. He didn't need to. He believed he'd already won. "Lieutenant Hale," he said, "please step forward." She did. Quietly, he adjusted his stance, subtly trying to seem taller. "For the record, please state your full name, rank, and active call sign during service." The courtroom barely noticed the question. They never did. It was standard protocol. Arya looked up from her book, watching her mother with steady faith. Lissa kept her eyes on the prosecutor. Lieutenant Lissa Hale, former Naval Special Programs. No current call sign. Judge Morton raised a brow. Former? Then what was it? A smirk formed. A judge playing to an imaginary audience. Just a joke. Just a harmless poke. The gallery chuckled softly. Lissa didn't respond immediately. She inhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, and something shifted in the room. Not visually, not audibly, but instinctively, like an atmospheric pressure drop before a storm. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "Night Fox." Everything stopped. Not dramatically, not loudly, just stopped. The way a room freezes when someone realizes they've accidentally walked into classified territory. A chair creaked. A clerk's fingers paused over a keyboard. A young Marine in the back straightened instinctively, as if a superior officer had entered. Judge Morton's smirk faded, replaced by confused blinking. Night what? Commander Reyes lowered his papers, expression stiff. A civilian in the gallery whispered to the man beside her, "Did she just say Night Fox?" The whisper traveled like electricity across a crowd. The judge cleared his throat, irritated. Is that supposed to mean something? Reyes leaned in. Your Honor, yes, it does. Judge Morton stared, waiting for an explanation. Reyes swallowed hard. Night Fox is an operational identifier from Special Activities Division, one of the few operators to successfully complete high-risk extractions under Phoenix Directive parameters. Morton frowned. English, Commander. It means, Reyes said, his tone flattening, she is the reason at least 9 classified operations didn't end with body bags. Now the silence wasn't confusion. It was respect and dread. Judge Morton blinked a few times, suddenly sitting straighter in his chair. Well, I'm sure that's exaggerated. He forced a laugh to regain control of the room. We hear tall tales in this courtroom all the time. Commander Reyes didn't laugh. These aren't tales, Your Honor. A Marine whisper echoed. Night Fox is the one they sent in when everyone else failed. Night Fox extracted an entire medic team from the Karasuk pit. Night Fox never missed. Judge Morton flipped through his file, suddenly realizing the information redacted in black ink probably wasn't there for decoration. So, he muttered, that's who you are. Lissa didn't confirm or deny. She simply remained still, hands gently folded. Reyes recovered first. Lieutenant Hale is not on trial for her past classified missions. She is here because she disobeyed a direct order during a training simulation. The pettiness of the allegation now hung awkwardly in the air. Reyes clicked to the next slide. This recording shows her refusing to follow standard command hierarchy. Lissa watched her own image on the screen, calm, composed, questioning a tactical order she knew was unsound. The audio played. If we proceed with your plan, the civilian proxy unit will be exposed. Lieutenant, I gave you an order, and that order violates safety protocols. The recording stopped. Reyes folded his hands smugly. Your Honor, we present this as proof of insubordination. The judge nodded slowly, still unsettled, still trying to regain footing. Lieutenant Hale, he said, what do you have to say for yourself? Lissa stepped forward again with measured calm. The simulation was designed to test real-world decision-making, not blind obedience. The order given was unsafe and would have resulted in unnecessary casualties, simulated or otherwise. Reyes scoffed softly. You think you know better than your commanding officers? Lissa did not blink. I think risk assessment is meaningless if we ignore it. A few people in the gallery nodded unconsciously. Reyes pressed on. This isn't war. This was training. Lissa's voice remained steady. Experience and training are linked. During my years on special operations, a single misjudged order meant lives lost. The Phoenix Directive required critical thinking, not submission. Her tone carried no arrogance. Just fact. Judge Morton shifted in his seat, glancing at the reports again, suddenly aware of how dangerously incomplete they were. Reyes approached, eager to undermine her. Lieutenant, are you claiming you deserve exemption from protocol simply because of who you used to be? No, she replied, meeting his eyes. I'm claiming that integrity doesn't end when the mission changes. Even Morton paused at that. Reyes tried again. You put your own judgment above command. Lissa nodded once. When command is compromised, that is exactly what an operator is trained to do. Reyes froze. Morton's eyes narrowed. Compromise? Are you alleging misconduct? Lissa didn't speak immediately. She weighed each word with surgical precision. Yes, she said at last, but not personal misconduct. Systemic. The air thickened. Morton leaned forward. Explain. Lissa opened her folder. A thin one, but what it contained mattered. She placed a single sheet on the table. This is a risk evaluation report from the simulation environment. It shows the terrain variables were incorrectly coded, making the original tactical plan unfeasible. Reyes stiffened. He hadn't expected her to bring documented evidence. She placed a second sheet. This is a testimonial from Staff Sergeant Callan stating he witnessed command override the safety algorithm to increase pressure. Reyes' jaw tightened. Then she placed the last sheet, quietly, like a final card in a winning hand. And this is a directive requiring all operators to report breach of protocol events, regardless of rank. Morton sat back heavily. Reyes' face paled. Lissa clasped her hand behind her back, a posture so instinctually militaristic that the room unconsciously straightened with her. She spoke softly, but it filled the space. I did my duty. I followed the rules. I acted to safeguard lives, simulated or not. If that is misconduct, then the system should reconsider what it expects from its operators. Silence. Not the kind born of confusion. The kind born of clarity. Morton cleared his throat. Lieutenant, why didn't you mention your operational history earlier? Because it wasn't relevant, Lissa said simply. And because I don't use my past as leverage. That landed harder than any defense Reyes had prepared for. Morton sat straighter, gaze now respectful, if not humbled. I see. Across the aisle, Arya closed her book and watched her mother, her posture mirroring the same quiet discipline. Judge Morton looked at the little girl, then back at Lissa. Whatever he expected from this hearing, this was not it, and something told him. Phase 1 was only the beginning. The room was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Every eye was on Lissa Hale now, though not a single person dared interrupt. Even Commander Reyes, used controlling the room, felt the subtle shift in authority. Judge Morton tapped his pen again, a nervous habit he couldn't quite suppress. He cleared his throat. Lieutenant, your explanation is noted, but protocol exists for a reason. Are you suggesting you have the authority to override orders simply because of prior experience? Lissa didn't flinch. I'm suggesting that protocol is meant to guide judgment, not replace it. Blind obedience kills. I've seen it too many times. And yes, in certain circumstances, operators are expected to make the call themselves. That is our training. That is our duty. The gallery murmured softly. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered quietly, as if confirming rumors they'd only ever heard in passing. Night Fox wasn't just a call sign, it was a legend. And now the legend was speaking calmly, methodically, like an officer reading a tactical report rather than a hero boasting of deeds. Commander Reyes straightened, trying to regain his stance. He clicked the next slide, a blurred photograph of the simulation's terrain, a computer-generated map overlaid with paths, red and green indicators. Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows a deviation from the signed protocol. The lieutenant refused to follow the route assigned by her commanding officer. This is insubordination. Period. Lissa stepped closer, hands clasped behind her back, posture unyielding but not confrontational. With all due respect, Commander, the assigned route would have exposed a civilian proxy to simulated fire zones that were inaccurately coded. Following the order would have caused measurable harm. Morton frowned. Measure harm in a simulation? Yes, Your Honor. Simulations are designed to replicate real-world outcomes. If we ignore the parameters and force compliance, the results are meaningless, and we risk creating habits that can endanger lives in actual operations. There was a pause. Even Reyes hesitated, as if realizing he was arguing against more than just a subordinate. Lissa continued, voice steady. I reported the discrepancy immediately through proper channels. I requested a risk evaluation. When command overrode the algorithm to increase pressure on the unit, I ensured documentation existed showing the breach. I followed procedure, even as the order conflicted with safety protocols. A clerk shifted in her seat, fingers frozen over her notes. The room felt heavier. The tension wasn't theatrical. It was a subtle gravity of truth landing in a space conditioned for lies and posturing. Lieutenant Hale, Morton said, you are claiming that disobeying a direct order was actually compliance with higher procedure? Yes, Your Honor. Commander Reyes' jaw tightened. And what about accountability? If every operator decided when to follow orders based on personal judgment, where would that leave the chain of command? Lissa tilted her head, expression calm, almost patient. Commander, accountability is not lost when judgment is exercised responsibly. It is reinforced. There is a difference between insubordination and making a choice to preserve life when orders are flawed. That distinction is what separates trained operators from untrained personnel. A few people in the gallery nodded subtly. One or two even whispered quietly, confirming their silent recognition of the truth. Morton pinched the bridge of his nose. And your call sign. Night Fox, do you want to explain to the court why that matters now? Lissa's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, not a smirk, just a controlled exhale. Because it shows context, Your Honor. It shows that I've operated under circumstances where a single misjudgment could result in catastrophic loss. It shows that training, experience, and situational awareness are not abstract concepts. They are the difference between life and death. The courtroom shifted. Even the young Marine in the back, who had been slouching, sat straighter. Aria's small hand squeezed her mother's quietly. The child had grown used to watching Lissa move through tension like it was air, fluid and inevitable. Reyes tried to recover. Lieutenant, your prior record may be impressive, but it is not relevant to the charge. You are not being tried for past heroics. Commander, Lissa said softly, I am not asking for relevance. I am providing context. Context for why I acted, and context for why the system should consider intent and outcome over blind compliance. Morton leaned forward, fingers drumming lightly. Intent and outcome, he paused. Do you have evidence to support that your decision prevented harm? Lissa reached into her folder and produced another sheet. She laid it carefully on the bench. This is an operational report generated by the simulation software. It documents potential exposure to hazards based on the original command order. She tapped a section with precise, deliberate fingers. According to this, proceeding with the original order would have exposed all personnel to simulated fire zones at 82% probability. Adjusting the route reduced exposure to 3%. The numbers were clinical, cold, undeniable. Reyes opened his mouth, but found no words. The facts were irrefutable. He clicked to the next slide, hoping to salvage authority, but contained nothing new, only the sequence of notifications Lissa had submitted during the exercise, showing prompt reporting and adherence to protocol wherever possible. Morton's eyes narrowed. And you're telling me all of this was done without seeking permission to override orders? Yes, Your Honor, because the permission protocol does not allow for timely decisions in a dynamic operational environment. That is exactly what the training is designed to prepare operators for. A pause. The room held its breath. Finally, Morton said quietly, I have never seen someone so composed under scrutiny. And yet, every word you say carries weight. Lissa inclined her head once. She did not let the comment distract her, nor did she expect gratitude. Her mission was clarity, not approval. The gallery began to murmur again, softly. Some observers exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something beyond a typical hearing. A seasoned officer whispered to his neighbor, Night Fox, she's the one who extracted the team from Karasuk. She's the one they always send when everyone else fails. Morton's hand tapped the table lightly. Lieutenant Hale, let me be clear. The court does not underestimate your past service. But in this hearing, we assess whether you disobeyed orders. Do you maintain that you acted correctly? I do, Your Honor. Not because I am unaccountable, but because the outcome adhered to both safety protocol and operational integrity. Every step I took was documented, reported, and verifiable. Reyes finally spoke, his voice low but tense. If that's the case, the chain of command could argue you bypass authority. That's dangerous precedent. Respectfully, Commander, Lissa said, it is only dangerous if we confuse procedure with principle. Orders are meaningless if following them creates unnecessary loss. Training is only valuable if judgment is allowed to operate within it. My actions reflect adherence to both principle and procedure, not the opposite. Morton leaned back in his chair, gaze lingering on her face. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was no drama. It was a still weight of authority meeting reason. Finally, he cleared his throat. Lieutenant Hale, I must admit, I did not anticipate this. The evidence you present is thorough. Your defense is compelling. A soft shuffle came from the gallery. Arya glanced up from her book again, watching, learning, understanding the quiet power her mother wielded. Morton sighed. We will recess briefly to review these materials in full. No further statements until then. As the gavel struck, silence filled the room, but it was no longer sterile. It carried awareness, respect, a quiet sense that the ordinary had just intersected with the extraordinary. Outside the courtroom doors, whispers grew. In the hall, officers exchanged uncertain glances. Some officers who had doubted, who had underestimated Lissa, felt a cautious respect blooming. Night Fox wasn't a nickname. It was a standard of precision, a symbol of silent lethal competence. And now, the courtroom could see just a glimpse of it. And as mother and daughter walked down the aisle to wait outside the chambers, the world seemed to bend slightly to the rhythm of the woman who had, in the space of a few words, reminded everyone that some legends don't need to roar to be heard. They simply exist. The courtroom had changed, whether they realized it or not. Lissa Hale, Night Fox, had reminded everyone that integrity and courage can exist even in silence, and that reckoning sometimes arrives quietly, like a fox in the night. The courtroom reconvened after a brief recess. The air was heavier now, not with anticipation alone, but with the weight of awareness. Lieutenant Lissa Hale had shifted the room's balance. She did not need to raise her voice. She did not need theatrics. Her presence was the argument. Judge Morton adjusted his glasses, flipping through the reports she had provided. Even he, seasoned in reading bureaucratic files and procedural documentation, felt the subtle gravity in each line. Lieutenant Hale, Morton began, voice controlled, the court has reviewed the material. Your evidence is detailed. Yes, Your Honor, Lissa replied, standing straight, hand behind her back, posture deliberate, calm, focused. Even when she spoke, it was a cadence of someone trained to command attention, without demanding it. Morton's gaze lingered on her. You are aware that, according to regulations, any refusal to follow direct orders is considered insubordination. Do you still maintain that your judgment superseded command protocol? I maintain, Your Honor, that my judgment aligned with both procedural compliance and operational safety, she said. Her voice was even, precise, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had operated under far higher stakes than a military administrative hearing. Commander Reyes leaned forward, attempting to assert dominance. Your Honor, the lieutenant is clearly suggesting that she is exempt from orders based on her past operations. That sets a dangerous precedent. If this is allowed, where does the chain of command end? Lissa's eyes met his. There was no anger, no challenge, only clarity. Commander Reyes, I am not asking for exemption. I am illustrating why adherence to principle matters as much as adherence to orders. The chain of command exists to protect lives, not to test blind obedience. The judge paused, letting the words sink into the room like measured rainfall. The gallery remained silent, but the subtle energy of recognition shifted. Even seasoned officers exchanged discreet glances. Some had heard the whispers before the hearing, Night Fox, Karis of Extraction, Phoenix Directive, but none had seen the operator speak calmly in person. Morton's pen tapped again. Lieutenant Hale, the record must reflect your statements. And yet, his eyes narrowed. You have a child present. Does she understand the gravity of this hearing? Arya, 8 years old, glanced up briefly, her small fingers tightening around the Fox keychain. She had learned to read her mother's signals. Remain calm, maintain poise, observe, and trust the process. Yes, Your Honor, Lissa said softly, almost inaudibly, though the courtroom caught it. She understands to remain quiet and composed. She is safe. Morton nodded, perhaps reassured, perhaps impressed. Very well. Commander Reyes, continue. Reyes exhaled, straightened, and approached the next slide, a video recording of the simulation in real time. This, he said, pointing to a moving map overlay. shows Lieutenant Hale directly contradicting a superior officer's order. The footage captures her intervention, which, though perhaps well-intentioned, was unauthorized. Lissa stepped forward, calm as ever, and pointed to a sequence of frames. If you notice, the simulation's variables were inaccurately coded. The fire zones were misrepresented in real time. Had I followed the assigned route, simulated casualties would have increased exponentially. Rhea's expression tightened, but he persisted. The algorithm does not lie. The order was clear. The deviation is indisputable. Yes, Commander. The deviation exists, Lissa said, her voice firm. But the deviation prevented harm. I followed procedure exactly where the simulation aligned with protocol. I intervened only where protocol had been violated through flawed data. This is not disobedience. It is operational integrity in action. A murmur spread across the gallery. Even Morton leaned forward, pen paused mid-tap. Lieutenant, he said slowly, you are describing the use of judgment under uncertain conditions. That is, sophisticated reasoning. Yes, Your Honor. Judgment is part of the operator's training. Protocols are frameworks, not substitutes for critical thinking. Following orders blindly can be lethal. The courtroom was quiet again, but the silence was no longer passive. It carried respect, awareness, a subtle fear of speaking incorrectly in the presence of someone who had faced true consequences for every misjudgment. Reyes clicked to another slide. Emails, notifications, and logs showing Lissa had documented each decision and reported anomalies at the moment they occurred. Notice, she said, walking toward the display, each entry corresponds to protocol requirements. I reported irregularities as they arose, escalated issues according to procedure, and ensured that every action was traceable. My actions were not unilateral. They were fully accountable. The judge shifted in his seat, leaning back. Lieutenant Hale, the court recognizes that your documentation is meticulous. Yes, Your Honor, she said simply. Meticulous because the stakes were high. Accuracy matters. Lives matter. Training matters. Morton's gaze flicked to the gallery, then back at her. Your call sign. Night Fox. Does this designation carry operational weight beyond what has been mentioned? Yes, Your Honor. Night Fox identifies an operator trained to make autonomous decisions under critical conditions. Assignments under this designation are high risk, often classified, and require discretion. The designation implies responsibility and accountability far beyond standard assignments. The courtroom absorbed that statement in measured waves. No one applauded. No one gasped. But a subtle shift occurred. Officers straightened. Observers leaned forward. Even the clerk seemed to inhale more deliberately. Reyes cleared his throat. So you were saying that past operational designation validates current judgment? Lissa shook her head slightly. Not validates. Explains. Contextualizes. The decision I made today is defensible not because of my history, but because it adhered to both procedure and ethical responsibility. Night Fox is a designation for accountability under pressure, not a free pass to ignore orders. The gallery murmured quietly again. A few observers exchanged glances, understanding that this was not bravado but quiet authority. Discipline made visible only through calm reasoning and evidence. Morton leaned forward. And yet you acted alone in a sense. You made a choice contrary to direct orders. Is there any record of objection or oversight at the moment of intervention? Lissa met his gaze steadily. Yes, Your Honor. As soon as the discrepancy was noted, I notified my superior through proper channels. At no point did I bypass reporting protocol. My judgment was applied in real time to prevent harm, but it was accountable, verifiable, and immediately documented. Morton exhaled. The court must acknowledge that your actions demonstrate both discretion and integrity. Unconventional, perhaps, but integrity nonetheless. A soft rustle passed through the gallery. Even Commander Reyes, though unwilling to concede verbally, was forced to recognize the weight of her argument. The numerical data, the documented procedures, the operational rationale, it all aligned. Lissa's voice, calm yet resonant, filled the final silence. I did what any operator is trained to do. I preserved the integrity of the system while safeguarding lives. If that is insubordination, then the system itself must reconsider its priorities. Morton's pen hovered over the papers before him. He glanced briefly at Arya, who sat quietly clutching her keychain, and then back at Lissa. I see. The word hung in the air, not a conclusion, not an applause, just acknowledgement. But for a courtroom conditioned to the mundane, acknowledgement of truth had power. Outside the courtroom, whispers had begun. Night Fox had walked in, and now the legend had spoken, not of exploits, but of principle. And those listening closely realized something rare. Heroism does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers through disciplined words, measured steps, and unwavering calm. As the hearing recessed again for internal deliberation, the subtle change in atmosphere remained. Officers who had arrived skeptical now carried a silent respect. Civilian observers felt awe-tempered by disbelief. And Judge Morton, seasoned and worldly, understood that today was no ordinary hearing, and that Night Fox had reminded everyone present what real integrity and courage looked like. Night Fox's calm authority had shifted the balance, but the final judgment, and the human reckoning it would trigger, was still to come. The courtroom reconvened after the second recess, but the atmosphere was charged differently now. It was no longer the sterile, procedural space of mourning. It was alive with quiet tension, the kind that comes when a room begins to understand it is witnessing something extraordinary. Judge Morton adjusted his glasses, pen in hand, his usual air of detachment softened by measured respect. Lieutenant Hale, the court has reviewed your documentation and statements. Your procedural diligence is commendable. But I must ask, are you aware that your actions, however well-intentioned, set a precedent for operational autonomy that could be misinterpreted? Yes, Your Honor, Lissa replied calmly, standing tall. I am aware, and I accept that any precedent carries risks. But the purpose of training and the purpose of protocol is not to suppress judgment. It is to guide it. I acted within the framework of both ethical responsibility and procedural compliance. A clerk typed quietly, recording every word. Arya sat beside her mother, small fingers clutching the fox-shaped keychain, eyes wide but composed. She had learned the rhythms of her mother's calm, the pause before speech, the measured inflection, the unspoken command that even silence held authority. Commander Reyes rose, his tone sharper now, tinged with irritation. Your Honor, I must interject. While Lieutenant Hale's documentation is thorough, we cannot ignore the fact that she made a unilateral decision contrary to a direct command. That is insubordination, no matter the circumstances. Intent does not absolve disobedience. Lissa met his gaze evenly, unflinching. Commander Reyes, intent does not merely justify. It contextualizes. You are arguing procedural compliance without acknowledging operational outcomes. Procedures exist to enforce safety and accountability. My actions preserve both. A few gallery members exchanged subtle glances, quietly recognizing the principle in her words. Outside the room, murmurs would have begun, whispers of Night Fox and her reputation. But here inside, the silence was a different kind, dense, thick with comprehension, and uncomfortable for those who sought to diminish her authority. Morton leaned forward slightly. Lieutenant Hale, your explanation implies that operators must occasionally exercise independent judgment, even under direct orders. How does the system account for accountability in such cases? The system requires documentation, Lissa said. She drew a second folder from her bag and placed it on the bench. Every deviation, every intervention, every risk mitigation step must be logged, reported, and verifiable. Accountability is inherent in the transparency of action. I followed that process exactly. Reyes stiffened, scanning the sheets she laid out. Maps, logs, timestamps, notifications, all meticulously compiled. Even the most skeptical observer could see the rigor. Morton tapped his pen lightly, considering. And yet, there is a human factor here. Commanders rely on obedience to maintain cohesion. If every operator chooses to act independently under pressure, cohesion could break down. Lissa did not flinch. Cohesion is maintained when the operator understands the mission, the intent, and the ethical constraints. Blind obedience, however, risks cohesion under duress. Cohesion built on informed judgment is far stronger than cohesion built on fear or rigid protocol. The gallery murmured softly. Some nodded, almost imperceptibly. Even Morton's hand paused mid-gesture. Reyes pressed on. Your Honor, the lieutenant's argument is compelling, but operational orders cannot be questioned in real time by subordinates without prior authority. The risk to command integrity is substantial. Yes, Commander, Lissa said calmly, and that is why I documented, reported, and ensured every step of my intervention was recorded. Autonomy and operational judgment does not negate accountability. It requires it. Morton exhaled slowly. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded over the bench. Lieutenant Hale, your logic is meticulous. Yet there is still a tension between procedure and precedent. Are you prepared for the court to consider that tension? I am, Your Honor, she said simply. Reyes, sensing the court shift, attempted one final push. And your operational history, Lieutenant? Knight Fox, do you intend for this designation to influence the court's perception? Lissa shook her head. Not influence. Provide context. The designation carries with it a record of accountability under extreme circumstances. It is proof that I have exercised judgment responsibly in high-stakes situations. That is all. Morton studied her for a long moment. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the stenographer paused slightly, aware that every word carried weight beyond mere documentation. Finally, Morton's voice broke the tension. Lieutenant Hale, the court acknowledges the rigor of your defense, the thoroughness of your documentation, and the clarity of your argument. But before judgment, I must ask one final question. Lissa inclined her head slightly, signaling readiness. Lieutenant, you are a mother. Your daughter is present. Do you believe your actions today, the way you conducted yourself under scrutiny, sets an example for her? Aria's small hand tightened around her keychain. She looked up at her mother, eyes wide, silent, trusting. Yes, Your Honor, Lissa said. I believe that integrity, accountability, and courage, whether in operations or daily life, are lessons worth teaching. I hope my daughter understands that truth, responsibility, and measured judgment matter more than unquestioned obedience or superficial appearances. The gallery remained silent. Even Reyes' posture shifted slightly, though unwilling to admit the recognition. Morton's pen hovered over the bench. He looked from Lissa to Aria, and then back at the folders spread before him. The courtroom felt smaller somehow, contained by the gravity of principle over procedure. You are aware, Morton said quietly, that some may see your actions as audacious or even reckless? Yes, Your Honor, I am aware, and I accept that perception. But audacity without principle is chaos. Audacity grounded in accountability is leadership. The courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, absorbing the quiet authority in her voice. The air vibrated subtly, not with theatrics, but with respect. Reyes cleared his throat, defeated for the moment. Your Honor, the lieutenant's record speaks for itself, but the chain of command, it must be preserved. Morton nodded slowly. The chain of command is preserved when those within it act with integrity and accountability. Lieutenant Hale, the court recognizes that your actions today reflect adherence to both principle and protocol, even when protocol alone was insufficient to ensure safety. A murmur passed through the gallery. Even hardened officers, observers who had expected drama and spectacle, were struck by the quiet power of her composure. Knight Fox was not a name shouted in a room. It was a standard measured in calm, lethal competence, and today, that standard was on display. Aria shifted slightly in her seat, her small eyes watching her mother. The child had learned that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered through preparation, evidence, and an unwavering calm that made even judges pause. Morton finally leaned back, gaze steady. We will take one more recess. The court will deliberate on the evidence, the testimony, and the principles presented. Let it be known, this case is far from routine. As the gavel struck, the room held an almost reverent silence. It wasn't fear and it wasn't shock. It was acknowledgement. Lissa Hale, Knight Fox, had reminded everyone present that integrity and courage could exist in silence, and that sometimes the quietest operators carry the heaviest weight and the greatest authority. Outside the courtroom doors, whispers began again, more certain this time. Those who had doubted the legend were now witnesses to it. Those who had underestimated her influence felt it settling subtly, like gravity. And within the courtroom, the human reckoning, respect, awe, and unspoken understanding was only beginning to unfold. Phase 4 ended with the sense that the climax was imminent. Night Fox had commanded the room without raising her voice, and now everyone was aware that the resolution of the hearing would not merely be procedural. It would be personal, historical, and profound. The courtroom reconvened one final time. The air was taut, no longer merely tense, but heavy with expectation. Every person present had sensed the shift in authority. Lieutenant Lissa Hale, calm and unassuming, had become the axis around which the room now revolved. Judge Morton cleared his throat, pen poised. Lieutenant Hale, the court has deliberated on the evidence, the testimony, and the principles you have presented. It is rare that a case challenges not only procedure but also perception, and yet he paused, scanning the assembled officers and observers. Your conduct today demonstrates clarity, accountability, and ethical judgment. Lissa stood, expression serene, hands clasped behind her back. Thank you, Your Honor. The gallery remained still, waiting. Commander Reyes, despite his professionalism, could not mask the subtle defeat in his posture. Even he had felt the gravity of her argument, the meticulous precision of her documentation, and the calm authority in her words. Morton continued, voice measured, Lieutenant Hale, the court finds that while you technically deviated from direct orders during the simulation, your actions were in strict adherence to procedural requirements, ethical standards, and operational integrity. The court acknowledges that your judgment was exercised with full accountability and in the interest of safety. A faint stir passed through the gallery, almost imperceptible. Some officers exchanged glances. Others shifted slightly in their seats. But the moment of formal acknowledgement was only the beginning. You are hereby cleared of any misconduct related to this hearing, Morton said, voice firm yet respectful. Even though the words were formal, the effect was immediate. A subtle exhale passed through the courtroom. Papers shuffled. Some attendees leaned back, digesting the significance. Then Morton leaned forward, fixing Lissa with a gaze that was both professional and deeply human. Lieutenant Hale, your call sign, Night Fox, is not just an identifier. It represents a standard of excellence, judgment, and courage. I must admit, I did not anticipate that a single operator, in a hearing such as this, could command such authority with nothing but evidence and reason. Lissa inclined her head. Thank you, Your Honor. My duty is to uphold the principles we train for. That is all. Aria's small hand squeezed her mother subtly. The child had watched everything unfold, observed the precision of her mother's logic, the steadiness of her presence, the power of integrity in action. Morton cleared his throat, voice quieter now, almost reverent. Lieutenant Hale, the court is not merely acknowledging your actions. The court is acknowledging the weight of your service, the responsibility you carry, and the courage it requires to act with integrity even when the chain of command is challenged. A hush fell over the room. Even Commander Reyes, stoic and disciplined, felt the gravity pressing. It wasn't about rank anymore. It wasn't about protocol. It was about witnessing a living example of a principle of motion. Morton glanced at the gallery. Let it be noted that Lieutenant Hale, Night Fox, has reminded this court and all present that courage, accountability, and ethical judgment are not theoretical. They are operational. And that true authority can manifest quietly with evidence, logic, and integrity. For a moment, the courtroom was silent, not because anyone was uncertain, but because everyone understood the weight of what had been said. Then Morton rose, standing fully. If there is anyone present who doubts the value of measured judgment, let them witness this. Lieutenant Hale, Night Fox, the court salutes your commitment. Slowly, one by one, officers, clerks, and gallery members rose from their seats. The act was not commanded. It was instinctive, a recognition of authority, courage, and integrity that transcended procedure. Reyes remained seated for a heartbeat longer, then slowly followed suit, his posture stiff but respectful. The air vibrated with unspoken acknowledgement. Even civilians in the gallery instinctively stood, aware that history, quiet, procedural, humanized history was unfolding before them. Morton's voice rose, firm and clear. "Lieutenant Hale, you have reminded us all that leadership is not about ego, rank, or ceremony. It is about discernment, accountability, and the courage to act rightly. The court stands in recognition of that principle." The room, once indifferent and procedural, now vibrated with respect. Silence held a weight that no words could carry. And in that silence, Lissa Hale, Night Fox, remained calm, her composure unshaken, her posture disciplined, her presence commanding without spectacle. Arya watched her mother, small fingers gripping the keychain. She had seen courage in action, seen it recognized, seen the way integrity could reshape a room without force. Morton looked around, scanning the entire courtroom. Let it be entered into the record that Lieutenant Lissa Hale, Night Fox, has demonstrated exceptional judgment, accountability, and courage. The court stands, not merely in judgment, but in acknowledgement of principle. Every person in the room remained standing, some silent, some with subtle nods of respect. The gallery had witnessed not only the resolution of hearing, but also the affirmation of a standard defined not by rank alone, but by the combination of evidence, integrity, and unwavering ethical judgment. Finally, Morton gestured, voice calmer, almost tender. "You may be seated. Lieutenant Hale, your record is clear, and may your actions continue to serve as an example of measured courage in the face of procedural challenge." As Lissa and Arya took their seats once more, the room exhaled collectively. The energy shifted from tension to quiet reverence. Commander Reyes approached, voice measured, extending his hand. "Lieutenant, well argued, well documented. I underestimated your clarity under scrutiny." Lissa shook his hand briefly, nodding. "Thank you, Commander. I am glad the court prioritized principle." Outside the courtroom, whispers of Night Fox's legend had already begun to circulate. Observers discussed the quiet authority, the calm precision, the way she had commanded respect without theatrics or aggression. For Arya, walking alongside her mother after the hearing, the lesson was clear. Courage does not roar. Authority does not demand. Legends do not need an audience to exist. They simply act with integrity, and the world responds accordingly. As they stepped into the light beyond the courthouse doors, the story of Night Fox, the operator, the mother, the legend, was no longer a rumor. It had walked into a courtroom, spoken with calm authority, and reminded everyone present that true strength lies in discipline, integrity, and measured courage. And somewhere in the echoing halls, the murmurs continued. Night Fox, she didn't just follow orders. She defined what it means to act rightly. She didn't need to fight anyone. She just stood, and the court stood with her. The courtroom had witnessed not only the vindication of a procedural argument, but the quiet, humanized triumph of principle over ego, legend over doubt, and courage over indifference. If the story of courage, integrity, and quiet heroism moved you, don't let it fade. Follow the heart-listened stories. Every narrative we share uncovers the hidden strength, dignity, and humanity in people who inspire without seeking recognition. Remember, sometimes the quietest actions leave the loudest impact. Subscribe and join us, because every story deserves to be heard.